Hello, I hope you're enjoying Vuejs Global. Now we are going to look at Vue 3 reactivity under the hood. We are going to take a peek at Vue 2, and then we see how Vue 3 makes it differently. And then we are going to make a live demo where I implement the Vue 3 reactivity from scratch. That's going to be very interesting. My name is Marc. This is my sidekick. She's called Yoda. Yes, like in Star Wars. I'm based in Luxembourg. I work as a freelancer and I love working with Vue and Node.js. I host a podcast called Whiskey Wednesday, where we talk about web development and everything around it. And we happen to sip whiskey while doing so. I usually hang out on Twitter. So if you have any questions afterwards, that's where I hang out. That's where you can find me. Okay, so let's get started. What is reactivity? Reactivity is magic, right? Because you change one value and magically it just updates everywhere where you need it. So it's magic. Or is it magic? So to answer that, let me tell you a little story. I come from a jQuery background, and when I first started getting into Vue, I was like, what? How does this work? Why is it even working? And I didn't read too much into it. I just was using it, and I loved using it. I loved the reactivity. Until February, where I joined Vuejs Amsterdam, and I also met this awesome guy. I bet many of you recognize him, Evan Yu himself. I took a workshop with him where he went through Vue 2 reactivity and other things. And the reactivity part was something that I found extremely interesting. So I think this is something that many people can enjoy. So yeah, what is reactivity not? It's not magic, and it's certainly also not rocket science. And I will prove that to you because we are going to implement our own little version, simplified version of reactivity. So to start, what is reactivity in itself? So basically, it's just you change one thing and then it updates wherever it's needed. So what we need to do is we need to listen to changes and we need to notify when there are changes happening. So this is called the observer pattern, which is implemented in Vue.js. So there are three components or three ingredients we need to make this happen. The observer pattern, which in Vue is called the dep class. And we need to override getters and setters of our objects. This is done in Vue 2 with object.defineProperty. And the last ingredient is the watcher. So the dependency class, how does it work? Well, it implements the observer pattern. It records like little functions or so-called effects that are side effects that needs to be rerun when there are changes, and there's a notify function. Well, it notifies when changes happen. So it looks something like this, a little bit more complex, but basically like this. So we need a space where we save our effects or our functions. Then we have a function, it's called depend, where we register the effects or record the effects that we want to react on, and notify is a command where we execute all the registered effects again. So everything is updated and in its place. So yeah, this is the dep class. The second part is, well, we need to make the data reactive. So we need to override our property getters and setters. So in this example, at runtime, Vue makes this object data of a person's name, age, and country, makes it reactive. So this has internal values, obviously, and for every property, the following happens. So first, we set up an observer. So the dep class we saw earlier, we set that up. Then we override the get function so that when some part of the code accesses that property, we depend the dep class. So we just record that we want this side effect to be executed when something changes, and we override the set function. The setter. So this is when we detect that a change happens, we want to rerun all those effects that we need updated. So in practice, this looks a little bit like this. Here we iterate through all the keys, and we see here we set up our observer. This is just creating an instance of the dep class we saw before. And in Vue 2, we used define object.define property to intercept or to override getters and setters. And that looks a little bit like this. We call the depend function whenever some part of the code accesses that property. And yes. And we set, well, when we override the setter, we first check if it's not the same value, because if the same value, we don't need to update it. But if it's a different value, we update the value, and we notify, we execute notify. So we execute all the effects again. This happens here in the set. Okay, and then a watcher. I'm not sure if we have time in the live demo to go more into it, but it's basically to make sure that changes are only notified when we want them to. So when they are inside an effect, we will see in the demo more exactly what's that about. So we have something like this. We have a function, and we do something with the person's age, for example. And we execute that effect. But so in this case, we record or we notify. We depend on the age. So this means that inside the effect, we want the age to be reactive, but in the other part outside the effect, we don't want that. So here, we only want to notify for this function or the effect, but don't want this to happen. So that's where the watcher comes in. So now Vue 3 reactivity. So now we saw how Vue 2 works, and Vue 3 works a little bit differently. So instead of object.define property, we use proxies and reflect. We will see that in the demo as well. And furthermore, we see we use set, map, and weak map. So basically, Vue 3 reactivity is based on these cornerstones, on proxy, reflect, set, map, and weak map. So let's go a little bit into proxy before we start with the demo. If we create a proxy object based on another object, when we set the value of the proxy, it sets the value in the target, as we call it, or in the original object. And if we access the data, the same thing, we request the data from the original object. But the really cool thing here is that we can intercept these things. So the setter, we can intercept the setter, the getter, and other things. So here comes our reactivity in place. Here we can implement that we need to notify, for example, when a change happens. So some words about the organization of data in Vue.js. We have the target map, which is a weak map, depth map, which is a map, and the depth, which is a set. So we already saw this. The depth basically has just is an array. Well, not an array, it's a set. It's a list of side effects or functions that are executed when a change to that property happens. So yeah, remember that the effect is basically just a function. And in a set, we don't have double entries. This is very useful for us because we don't want to execute an effect twice. And then we have the depth map. There, the key is a string. So, for example, name, age, country, and the value is a depth. So this is basically for each property of a given object. So for each property, we have a list of functions that are going to be executed when it changes. Then we have another layer on top of that, which is the target map. The target map is a map, but instead of a string as a key, it takes an entire object as a key. So in this case, yeah, the key is an object. For example, this name Mark age 33, and the value is a depth map. So if you see it like this, the target map is a collection of objects. For every object, we have a list of properties, and for every property, we have a list of effects or side effects that are being executed when something changes. In the example, because of time reasons, I will only implement the depth, but I might mention some things more about the others as well. One last word about the terminology. Instead of depend in Vue 3, it's called track, and instead of notify, we use trigger. So let's get ready for the live demo. We are going to build the Reactivity engine from scratch. Okay, so I already took the liberty to set up a very simple HTML file, which just implements or includes this Reactivity.js, which is this. It doesn't have any information yet, except Vuejs Global is awesome, of course. Let's start. We create a product which has a price, let's say 10, and it has a quantity. For example, four products of the price of 20, and we want to calculate the total of our product. So the total is product.price times product quantity. When now we go ahead, we log out the total, we see here it's 40, which is correct. But when we go ahead and we change, for example, quantity to 5, and we log it out again, it gives us again the same thing logically, because we still would have to implement or to execute this code. So to set this, also if we go ahead, product price is becoming cheaper. It's now 8, and when we execute it, it doesn't get updated until we execute this. So you see our problem here. It's kind of tedious to always write this. So we write this. We make a function for this, and we've called the function effect. Okay, so here we just start with 0, and instead of calling this, we call effect. So now it works. We start with 0 and it sets the data as wanted. So now it's time to implement our observer pattern. So we do that with what we learned. It's called track and trigger. So function, track, and function trigger as such. So in a real implementation, we would have something like target and key here in both of them. But because of time reasons, we won't implement that. But so now when we track means we want to know when something, when we want something to change. So here we create our dep. We learned that's just a set, basically an array which doesn't have double entries. And we just add our effect, dep add the effect. And for the trigger, we would just run all the list of all our effects. So we go for each, and it's filled with effects. And for each effect, we just execute it as such. Okay. So another word again here for the target and the key. What we would do in the real deal is something like this. We would get the depth map from the target map, and we would get the depth from depth map of target map. Okay, but yeah, this is just so you have more in mind what would happen here. There would be some more code here. Okay, so instead of so first we need to track our stuff, and instead of effect we just call trigger. Stays the same here because, well, let me just add some logging here. We log, so track and trigger, so gets tracked and then triggered twice. So yeah, now we have our observer pattern, but we still don't have reactivity. We still have to put trigger everywhere after we updated a value. So let's jump a little bit into proxies. I comment this out for the moment, and we create a product proxy, which is new proxy, new proxy. We pass as a target our product, and we pass a handler. We see more about this later. So when I go ahead now, I go product proxy. Well, let's log it out. Log product proxy.quantity. Quantity. We have 4. When we update that, let's say 5, it's exactly what we would expect. So there's no much difference until now. But that's called the handler, the second parameter. There we can set up something that's called traps. So we intercept the default behavior of our object and we override it. So we can just override the set. In this case, let's just log out set. Okay. So I actually wanted to start with get. Let's so every time we get a property from our object, this is being called, and we get undefined as result because we're not returning anything. So if we would be to return 0, we would have 0 here. So our get trap accepts some parameters. One is target and key. So we get the key. So in this case, get quantity. If I were to access the price, it would say there get price as such. Okay, now we need to return the real value here. So we set up a result, and the value would be, we just fetch it from our target using the key, and we return the result. So now we rewrote the get method as it's implemented normally. We just added some logging. We can do the same with setting values. This takes 3 arguments: target, key, and value. So we would be going like set the key to the value. And you would see here set quantity to 5, for example. So this here we can set the value. So we set the in our target from the key, we set the value that we pass. So the return value here is a boolean. So just so the system knows if it's been successful or not. Okay, so this is basically it, but there is some magic in Vue that I said didn't exist, but it does. No. So we these traps, they accept an extra parameter is called receiver. Both accept this receiver, and instead of doing this, we use reflect.get target and key, and we add the receiver. So this line of code is basically what makes Vue 3 Reactivity better than Vue 2, because this saves us some caveats we had in Vue 2. So this basically this tells the system to have, or this assures that we always have the correct this keyword when we access the data. So this saves us some trouble. We can also do this here. We can set up the result, and we set target, key, value, and not to forget the receiver. Let me make this a little bit smaller. Okay, and we return the result of the operation. Nothing changed here so far. So far, so good. So I take out these loggings, because now we do something like our here we can tap in our, or plug in our observer pattern. So here, when something accesses the attribute or the property in our object, we want to track. What do we track? The target and the key. Again, we didn't implement this because of time reasons, but this would be how it looks like. So here we tell the system, hey, I want to be notified when something changes. Yeah, I want to be notified. And here we notify when something changes. Yeah, we trigger the target and key. So now when we save this, we see track, trigger, track, track. So what's that? That's this. So these changes are actually tracked, and there's also a trigger here because we set something. But let's refactor our code a little bit. The second parameter I told you, it's called a handler. So we just call it by its name. We refactor this, we call it handler. And we put all of this in a function. We call this function reactive. We pass to the reactive, we pass a target, so an object, and we make our object or our target reactive. So we return the proxy, and to the proxy target, we pass the target we received from the reactive function. There we go. Okay. Now, yeah, proxy product doesn't exist. So far, so good. So we can pull up again the example we had before. Here, we just remove the track, the trigger, and the other trigger. So now it's 0 everywhere because this is not reactive. When we make it reactive with the function we define here, so this makes it reactive by plugging in the setter and getter to our dependency or to our observer pattern. So here we see we trigger something. This is already pretty good. But yeah, it doesn't update. Why doesn't it update? That's a good question. Oh, yeah, it doesn't update because you need to run the effect first. Because if not, it doesn't know what we have access to. Okay. Okay, so far so good. Now, what I want to do is I want to implement a watcher. So we get we have our dependency tracker working when we set a value here, but the thing is we don't want that. We just want that in our effect. So I take down this effect here, so we see what we're doing, and I will write this this watcher. Let's call it the watcher effect. We pass in a function, and yeah, we have something that's called active effect. When we start off, it's null, but when we pass it to our watcher, we set it to the function. And if and only if there is an active effect, we also execute it. And we set it back to null. So this ensures that in the track function, we have this active effect ready. So let's refactor one more time. We take up the active effect to the top. And in our track function, we just track if there's an active effect. All right, and we pass on the active effect here. Effect has already been declared. That's true. We don't need this anymore. And also we don't need this anymore. We would do something like effect, and we pass our function here. Function was total is product.price times product.quantity. So if I go now product.price or .quantity, let's set it to 100. Yeah, we see the trigger gets set. So to make this even more visible, let's log the total changed, and log up the total change everywhere. This is a little bit distracting. Let's remove our logs from trigger and track. And when we go ahead and we set a new quantity, yeah, our total changed. When we set a new price, it changes as well. So there we have our reactivity. So to make this a little bit more visual, let's just take out the product, the total, and our effect here. Let's take this out. We can delete this. And you remember we created a HTML file, this one, and we just enter it here. Okay, so this is the same as before, but we could do something like this. We can have a span that's of ID total. It has a tags of nothing. And when we change, when an effect happens here, we can do something like document get element by ID total, and we set our inner text to the total. So cool. When I set now product dot quantity is 100, this updates as well. So we could also do something like this. We could add a button, let's call it minus, and on click we update our product our quantity of our product, say minus minus, and we do the same for plus. So let's try it. So we have our reactivity here. And to make one last example, we can add color to the product. Let's make it green, and we can add a new effect. When the color changes, we want that to be displayed as a background color. So document body style background background is product.color. So now it's green. So we just need an input, not of text, but of color. We don't need all of this. Just on input, we change our product. Color is this value. We have something really cool like this. Instant update with our new Vue.js reactivity. Yeah, so this is the demo. I hope you liked the demo. I think it's pretty fun to do that. And yes, that's it. I want to thank you for your attention. And in this link, marc.dev/Vuejs Global, you can download all the code, including the complete code with the depths map and the targets map, so you can see how it would be implemented. And also a lot of this knowledge I gained for making this course, I gained it from Vue Mastery. So thank you a lot for Greg Pollack and all the other people at Vue Mastery. This has been very helpful for not only for making this course, but in general. So if anyone wants to learn Vue.js or get even more advanced in Vue.js, I think Vue Mastery is the best way to do so. Okay, I hope you enjoy the next talk, and yes, goodbye.